Greetings to all of you from New York City. Welcome, delegates and esteemed colleagues. It's my honor to present you with this year's report from the Working Group on Wildlife. We've had a very active and busy year with our annual meeting delayed a little bit in the end of last year. And we held our meeting in March instead of 2020, but it's gotten us pretty up to date. So you'll see there are a lot of good current issues that I'll be presenting in this report since we captured the beginning of this year. We also routinely, and every year we do this, is meet through teleconferences throughout the year. And so this past year, in addition to the annual in-person meeting, we've had 4 additional video conference meetings, and then of course email on almost a weekly basis, if not daily at some points in time, to work on issues around wildlife diseases and support the efforts of OIE. At this year's meeting, we were also able to have great participation and attendance from 3 of the commissions from OIE, the Scientific Commission for Animal Diseases, Biological Standards Commission, and also the Aquatic Animals Commission. So that's been helping us move forward with coordination and interaction and supporting OIE once again, as we've done in previous years. But it was really great, and we really want to thank the commission members and the support of the commissions for this more active engagement in our program. Just moving right on from that topic, what we've been doing with the commissions, and it came up at the meeting, kind of as a culmination of the year's efforts. There are several requests that have come through, and I'll go through a few of those with you. There was a question in the terrestrial code and also the manual chapters related to non-human primates and diseases for that, and zoonotic diseases, and also related to quarantine. And that was a question about great apes and gibbons and hepatitis B viruses. So we were able to make some recommendations for the commissions to consider in revising the code chapters, and you can see here the main key is there's been a lot of confusion about hepatitis B viruses of humans over the years and cross-reactivity with similar hepatinoviruses found in non-human primates. And our recommendation was to ensure that specific tests were used so to eliminate that confusion about are these animals carrying the human hepatitis B virus, which really is only seen in experimental settings, and versus the ones that naturally occur in those species. We have been talking with the commissions about the vaccination of animals of high conservation value. This refers primarily to captive collections and captive breeding efforts for conservation, and to work with competent authorities in different countries about making those plans in case of an outbreak where a vaccination might protect endangered or threatened species or valuable species for conservation work from the disease as we would in animals. So we've asked for some revisions and made some recommendations on that. And really so that the Australian government has been really making great advances on this. So we recommended using their guidance for consideration of off-label use. We've done a lot of work on these technical disease cards, and we'll get to that later in the session. But the Biological Standards Commission offered to help us with that effort and to review some of the disease cards that we are writing for the non-listed diseases. And of course, where there is the opportunity for OIE listed diseases, the Wildlife Working Group is certainly available to provide guidance and input as decisions are made about those technical cards related to listed diseases being found in wildlife, but also in the other direction, using the expertise of the Biological Standards Committee to help us with the technical cards for the non-listed diseases that we're also requesting reporting for wildlife, the voluntary reporting. This year was a great interaction with the Aquatic Animal Health Standards Commission. So we realized that the work of the Wildlife Working Group, while we do sometimes work with aquatic species, there's not been a strong connection there. And so through the discussions, once again, we found that there was a lot of mutual benefit of information from the working group that we could use to help support that of the Aquatics Commission. But the other way too, that so many members in the Aquatic Commission and their colleagues could really help us grapple with some issues in the wildlife realm for wildlife diseases and wildlife health in aquatic systems. So what we've agreed to do is start to share more of our findings and our work with each other after our annual meetings or after our periodic reviews to so each group could have a little better understanding and keep abreast of what the other groups are doing. On the disease reporting front, we always meet with the information department there at OIE. So this year we had a very productive time meeting with them for several hours. We reviewed what Wahis Wild, what is being voluntarily reported from OIE members. Since 2012, for the last 8 years, there's been a continued downward trend in the number of reports of non-OIE listed diseases in wildlife. There was a small increase in 2018, which is encouraging. And of course, for 2019, it's still a little too early to say. We hope it's increased again. The good news is that we found that the quality of the reporting that is being provided is significantly improved. And so countries, members are providing more information in their reports. Even if we're not getting more members to report, we're getting more robust information. And we're also really happy to see that for the OIE listed diseases, of course, which is mandatory reporting to WAHIS and to OIE, they have really, country members have been doing a very good job on reporting those even when they're found in wildlife, which really does help us understand the broader picture of how diseases are circulating in animals around the world, and to also ensure transparency among countries, so countries can understand what's going on in their neighboring countries and be on the lookout for some of these diseases as they emerge. We have reconsidered the criteria for the voluntary reporting of the non-listed diseases as in wildlife. And we made a little comparison table about how the voluntary reporting for wildlife diseases, how that is different from the OIE listed diseases, even when it's found in wildlife, and how that's different from the reporting obligations for emerging infectious diseases. So please look at our full report. That is detailed in the appendix of the full report of the working group, which you will have available. And you can see that chart, but the simple version is here on the screen, that our basic approach to the criteria of how we decide if we want to include in our list of voluntary reported non-listed diseases for wildlife. So the criteria is that, of course, the agent or the disease is found in wildlife. Of course, not all of these infectious agents or toxicological agents present as a disease in wildlife, but as you all know, they might cause disease when introduced to other species or including humans. So we want to say first, we would never list anything that's not found in wildlife. It must be found in wildlife. And then it has to be shown, there's a scientific evidence to indicate that it has a detrimental impact on wildlife or on non-wildlife, domestic animals, aquatic animals, other animals that wouldn't be considered wildlife, or detrimental impact on the health of humans. So we're using those two criteria, found in wildlife and this detrimental impact, is what we use as our first cut for considering a disease or a syndrome to be put on the list for voluntary reporting. We've been working on one of the requests for the voluntary list, particularly from the delegates and the focal points for wildlife, was if we could provide more information on these specific diseases that we're requesting voluntary reporting to help them, guide them through how to make the diagnosis, or how to, when and when not they should be reporting. So we're using the same format as the technical disease card for the OIE listed diseases, using that as a template, and the the collaborating center for wildlife health and biodiversity. Actually, the team in the U.S. component of that is a split center with Canada and the U.S., and they've been doing great contributions to OIE and support as a collaborating center. And they really took on this leading effort to develop these technical disease cards. So far in the year, they've produced over 20. They've been reviewed. They were sent out to focal points for comments, reviewed internally at OIE, and are now being posted on the website. And we'll continue to work on those. The working group members, of course, participated in editing and reviewing those and getting them out and getting them ready to get sent out to the delegates and focal points for use, and of course, posting on the website. So we hope that facilitates reporting. We do another section during our annual meeting where we do a horizon scan or look across also what's going on, what's new, what's emerging, what are noteworthy. And I won't have time to go through all of those today, but there's quite a bit of detail in our full report. Also in his appendix, you'll see that there's 10 pages or so of details on each of these diseases that we feel deserve attention. They are new or noteworthy or spreading, of growing concern, and they affect many of your countries. might just mention a few. Some new things, we're seeing edema disease now being found in wildlife in Western Central, you're right in the heart of Europe. Sarcoptes scabies or mange, we've mentioned before, as spreading through the southern part of the New World in South America and up into Central America in carnivores. It's very alarming for such an old disease to be making such a resurgence. We're seeing range expansion of potential mosquito vectors such as Aedes albopictus. And so we do want to kind of bring some attention to you, and you can kind of look in those details in the report to get more information about that. Another one is rabbit hemorrhagic disease, which is an old disease that we've been dealing with for a long time in Europe, but now it's come into North America. It started up very far north. It's spreading down into southern US. We're very concerned about spread further down into Mexico, and then maybe possible introduction to lagomorphs in South America. It would be very detrimental to wildlife population. As we know, they're not only the domestic lagomorphs that are used for food, but a wild component that is also used for food, but some are also threatened and endangered. We've spent some time reviewing and meeting with personnel from the various groups for diseases where there's official control strategies. We've done a lot of work this past year with Peste de Petit Ruminant. And so we've been working with that group, the GREN group, to add a wildlife control component and really a manual or first take on guidelines for control and preventing PPR in wildlife populations. That work is now finalized. It's gone through approval, and that will become part of the OIE and the joint FAO work on a global control strategy. We've made some recommendations to go further to provide some more technical information for appendices that could be added in there, such as diagnostics, more details on surveillance strategies. And we thought that this effort has gone really well and very well received by the other partners working on the PPR global strategy, and to use that as a model for going in and helping and assisting with other disease control global strategies going forward. So I'll mention a few of those because we actually met with those teams. So we met with the lead for with the African swine fever, because there's a GFTADS global initiative for control there. And we felt that we could provide some support there and information on wild pigs, wild swine, such as training programs for hunting and biosecurity on those, mapping wild boar populations. That would be particularly for Europe and Asia, and also linking with experts in the Wildlife Disease Association, which is a large and well-formed organization of wildlife disease experts around the world, and to bring them into play in countries to help member countries dealing with African swine fever in wildlife. We had a nice meeting with the rabies team, and while we do realize that the global strategic plan for rabies elimination is really related to dog-mediated rabies, we want to take that opportunity, because knowing that as you get successful with controlling dog rabies, there's still a wildlife component which will come home to haunt us. So we want to be paying attention to that and thinking ahead. So we talked about the control in vampire bats. I know many of you know traditionally vampire bats are poison to that. So we want to explore ways about reducing the use of poisoning to control vampire bats to reduce rabies. There are some efforts now being made for topical vaccines for rabies that might be able to use in bats. And by topical, that's really an oral vaccine. It's applied topically, but when the bats groom themselves or they groom each other, they would be potentially vaccinated. And another, of course, is to encourage the use of vaccinating livestock where livestock are at risk to rabies from vampire bats. We do the three other groups, just briefly mention, with highly pathogenic avian influenza, working with those teams, and that's particularly with OFFLU. Just to note, there's been 6 outbreaks in the last year of high path avian influenza in non-poultry, outside of poultry, and that's including wild birds. Zoonotic tuberculosis and foot and mouth disease. We had discussions, the same things, with the same problems with diagnostics that we know for both the diseases, and diagnostics and control strategies in wildlife are very challenging. And we really need to get our heads around and work with, reach out and work with other groups to come up with newer methods to really improve diagnostic and control strategies for wildlife for both of those diseases. We've reviewed the outreach and some connections with international wildlife or biodiversity organizations, ways for OIE to partner and have some synergistic effects with other organizations. So I wanted to talk about a few of those with you today, so you get a sense of what our conversations. One, of course, is CITES, the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species for Wildlife. It's flora and fauna. OIE already has a letter of agreement to be working with CITES, and they have for a couple of years. Our big focus has been on to facilitate the rapid movement of emergency diagnostic specimens for endangered and threatened species. Currently, that requires a CITES permit, which can take up to 6 months or a year, and for some countries to obtain a CITES permit just to send a diagnostic sample to a reference lab or to another country to get help in making a diagnosis if the animal is endangered or threatened. So we've been working with them at the last convention of the parties. There was a vote to ask the Secretariat to make that more or less burdensome or less time consuming. We are still engaging with the Secretariat because now that the Convention of the Parties has passed the resolution telling them to do that, there's still the process of actual implementation. And we would ask all of you, if you could, to reach out to your counterparts in your CITES management authorities in your country to please encourage them to consider that emergent diagnostics for wildlife should be handled much as we do for livestock or for domestic animals and for humans, which is those samples tend to be sent within a day or two without requiring any additional permitting. So we would like wildlife to be treated as we treat domestic animals and humans in a global world where we really depend on each other to help with diagnostic support. There are other ways OIE, of course, could engage with CITES, as we noted when working and talking with them, is that CITES really they're not able to, and that it's not in their mandate, to set standards for things like animal welfare standards for wildlife or animal health standards for the trade or the shipment of endangered species. So OIE could potentially serve, since we are a standard setting body, that CITES could refer countries, member countries of CITES, to use the OIE standards for the movement of those animals. And the same, of course, for euthanasia or the killing of animals, the slaughter of animals. Of course, CITES deals with animal products as well as animals themselves. And so they have should be dealing with the same types of issues that OIE members deal with, except with CITES, they don't really, once again, have that expertise or mandate. And so we feel like they could rely on OIE for providing that type of guidance or refer their signatory countries to use the OIE standards. The United Nations Environment Program, once again, I think all of you have counterpart authorities in your countries and as members or in your territories, that we really feel that UNEP has been left out of the mix. We talk about One Health and the tripartite, but we've never really engaged fully UNEP. And in recent times, especially now with COVID-19 in this past year, UNEP is really kind of rising to the occasion and thinking about their role in biodiversity conservation and how that relates to health. So I think the time is good, and the members of the group felt there would be, and it's in early stages. So we're encouraging OIE to explore establishing a framework for cooperation between the parties. Once again, utilizing OIE's expertise in standards and guideline setting. And then, of course, UNEP and OIE working together to support and capacity building efforts in member countries that directly could apply to the focal point for wildlife and help them gather more information on wildlife health in members and member countries to facilitate reporting. Similarly, there's the Wildlife Disease Association. I mentioned this a little earlier. This was founded in 1952. There's over 1,000 members. This is comprised of veterinarians, parasitologists, virologists, ecologists, epidemiologists. And it's a professional scientific society. The members are distributed all over the world. Most of you have WDA members in your country. We also, as a working group, recommended that OIE explore developing a working relationship or a framework for cooperation with the WDA and look at, once again, WDA through their members becoming a vehicle for disseminating OIE information and guidelines and recommendations, and once again, supporting capacity building in member countries to work on the environment side and also wildlife disease monitoring efforts in countries, and utilizing the expertise and the resource of WDA members as volunteers to support OIE just as we do. We did have time to talk about SARS coronavirus 2, or COVID-19 as the disease is called in humans. The OIE has asked the working group to come in and help establish an informal advisory group, which is now changing into a more formal or an interim ad hoc group to look at COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2. And we've been meeting almost weekly for the last several months prior to our annual meeting to help OIE develop guidelines at least on going forward on COVID-19 and in animals. And that would include diagnostics, some epidemiology about it, helping to identify host susceptibility, which species are, compiling reports on cases of SARS-CoV-2 in animals. I know many of you are familiar with that, so we certainly know susceptible in domestic animals, reports in domestic cats and domestic dogs. There's been some very good laboratory studies looking at susceptibility of other domestic animals, such livestock, such as pigs and poultry, which it looks like they are not very susceptible to that and do not host a productive infection. At least that's what we've seen to date. We know bats, of course, are susceptible, and there's ongoing trials with that. Non-human primates are now shown to be susceptible. So we're concerned about the disease spilling back from humans into primate populations where it could potentially become established as a reservoir. So we want to make recommendations that would protect those wildlife. We've seen some non-domestic felids, such as lions and tigers. We know they are susceptible, and luckily it appears that they do not succumb to very severe disease. But we do want to pay attention to that around the world. So the working group is working closely with OIE and a broader group on COVID-19. We've also, through OIE, asked to help the World Health Organization. There is the research and development roadmap. So early on in late January and February, we started working with WHO to set research priorities and also funding priorities. And we're very pleased to see the World Health Organization engaging OIE as a partner to come in and help set those priorities, since we know these viruses and this whole group of viruses is linked with animals, and that we know there's animal susceptibility. So we're really pleased to be partnering and working with WHO on helping with the best practices and guidelines. And that is, that last component is really helping OIE with guidance documents on animal issues, sampling, testing, communications. That work is ongoing. There's concern about live wildlife in markets. That work is ongoing at OIE. And to come out as an organization and make recommendations for countries and stand together in unity and be transparent about what work is being done with animals, and to stand together on recommendations there. As most of you do know, the SARS-CoV-2 virus looks much like viruses we've found circulating in bat populations, but other animal populations too. So if you're familiar with coronaviruses, this is just two of the groups of coronaviruses, alpha and beta. And you'll see many of these coronaviruses, of course, are in humans or in animals. Some cause the common cold in humans. There's an alpha coronavirus that does that, but also beta coronaviruses, you can see that cause the human cold virus. We think some of these viruses in humans that cause the cold virus, some are linked back from hundreds of years ago with cattle. A couple of them look like they came from bats, maybe in the 16, 17, 1800s, and became human cold viruses, the common cold virus of humans. We also see them we have the MERS coronavirus group is in this beta group, and a large group that we've seen around the original SARS coronavirus and similar families, if you can see my pointer moving here on the left, in bats. And these are called SARS related now. The new terminology is SARS-like coronaviruses. And you see there's quite a few. And in fact, there's some very good work being done in China and Southeast Asia. And there are hundreds of these coronaviruses that are SARS-like coronaviruses in that cluster circulating in the wild and primarily in bats. And we've done some work and also come out with Chinese colleagues looking at the prevalence of some of these SARS-like coronaviruses. And this is actually antigen testing, virus testing using PCR. You can see there's a long list of bat species here. Some are in this group, the Rhinolophus or the horseshoe group of bats, horseshoe bats, but some other species and genera even of bats are shown to be hosting these SARS-like coronaviruses, and fairly common when you start to look at the numbers there. And when you look at the range of those bats, on the right and with the red, that's all the different species of bats. And on the left here in the brown is just one species of Rhinolophus bat that has the SARS-like coronaviruses or COVID-19-like coronaviruses. So as people have talked about this being in China, we really see that the distribution of these bats is very widespread, and the distribution of the coronaviruses, of course, would be linked to the distribution of the host. So we wanted to highlight this for you to be aware of the distribution and the commonality of these bats and these viruses. And in human testing, for using serology for human testing, we also have seen between 0.5% to 3% of people in rural areas across this distribution have antibodies to this group of SARS-like coronaviruses. I'm not talking about specifically COVID-19, but as you remember, that cluster of SARS-like coronaviruses, that group of viruses, would detect antibodies in humans. So there is ongoing exposure of people to bats. So we always want to stay alert to a new disease arising. Then finally, I want to just close with the work program for this year. So for the Wildlife Working Group, we will, of course, continue to provide science-based and technical support to OIE and members for issues related to aquatic and terrestrial species and wild bees. We want to support the information department wide to encourage focal points on reporting and in any questions they have about non-listed wildlife diseases or listed diseases in wildlife. Communicate with OIE and the commissions to make sure we're fully engaged in responding to ongoing priorities and needs. Of course, assist in developing new partnerships and expanding the reach and outreach of OIE and to other groups or through other groups. And of course, as members, if you have recommendations for that, we are always open to your input for that. And then finally, of course, contribute to the implementation of the 7th OIE strategic plan. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen to the report. I would encourage you to please look at the full written report that's available from OIE for the details. The appendices are quite extensive. So there's a tremendous amount of information. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Please share that with your focal points for wildlife and any of the other colleagues you think might be interested. I hope you're all well. Please stay safe, and thank you for your time and your attention.